Hello, and welcome to part two of our series on the Ohio Centralized Reporting System. I'm Bryan Hollinger from the Stark County Educational Service Center, and today we're going to be taking a look at creating reports and rosters. Let's go ahead and jump right in today. First off, if you weren't able to join us for part one, we basically looked at just general navigation, how to look at our results, things like that. If you haven't had a chance to view that video yet, please make sure that you do at some point. And if not, we are going to go over a couple of basics to just make sure that you know how to get to the centralized reporting system. As we discussed in the last episode, right here is the link, the oh.portal.cambiumast.com. That will get you to the Ohio Assessment Systems homepage or launch page. And from there, you'll see that we have our Restart Readiness Assessments, our Ohio State Test, our alternative assessments, and our Ohio English Language Proficiency assessments. Those are all the assessments, or I should say, all of those assessments feed into the centralized reporting system. So from any of these, you'll be able to get to the centralized reporting system. But because on the last one we went with Ohio State Test, we'll go ahead and continue with that. So I'm going to click on Ohio State Test, scroll to the bottom of that next page that I get to, and I'm going to click on where it says teachers and test administrators. From there, we'll end up going to our navigation pane here. So we have our preparing for test tiles, we have our administering test tiles, and then we have our after testing, which is where we've been focusing on the centralized reporting system. So right here is our centralized reporting system. We'll go ahead and click on that tile right there. And it's going to ask us for our login. And from there, it's going to ask us to select a role if you have multiple roles. Now, if you don't have multiple roles, maybe you only have one role, you're a teacher, a TE, it may just let you in. There may not be a role to select there, or it may just come up, and you'll click continue. From inside, we'll see our tiles. Again, as you're looking at this, I think I mentioned it in our first video, you may only have one or two tiles depending on where you're at in the school year. So as we move forward and more tests have been given, it's possible that you'll see more tiles pop up that your students have taken there. You'll only see the tiles of tests that your students have taken, though, unless you're a higher level user, maybe like a administrator, maybe like a testing coordinator, something like that. You'll be able to see all the tiles of the tests that have been taken in your building. But generally, a teacher, you're just going to see the tests that your students have taken. Since we're looking at reports, we're going to start by coming over here to the right, and you'll notice that I've highlighted or boxed up this download student report. So that's where we want to start. We're going to go ahead and click on that. And when we do, with that, we're going to notice that we've got some expandable columns here that are going to, we're going to be able to open up, and we're going to pick exactly what it is that we want to print. Now, when I created this video, there wasn't a whole lot to choose from. So as the year goes by, this might become much more important to you, especially if there's a lot of tests in there. You probably are not going to want to print all of them. You'll probably only want to select certain things that you want to print. So let's go through and look at how to do that. So the first one, it's going to ask us which test we would like to or what's the reasoning for the test. So you can see right here, fall 2021, that was our fall testing from the state. If you've given benchmark and checkpoints, you know that one of the things that it asks you is to provide a reason. Maybe you gave it as a pre-test or a post-test. So you could see those reasonings in here as well as you're printing. But for right now, we're going to focus on this fall 2021 OST. We're then going to click next, and now we get to pick which assessment. So again, not a whole lot to choose from here. We just have that ELA test, but if there was more, you could do that. Um, Again, right now it's just third grade, but I could expand this if I click this arrow. If there were more than one third grade test, like in the spring, I could expand this and then say, okay, I only want to click the fifth grade test or something like that. But since I know that's only the third grade test that's in there, I don't need to expand that. I don't need to uncheck the all subjects. I can just leave that checked because I really know that there's only one test available here. I'm then going to click next. And when I click next, I'm going to get all the rosters that were available there. So again, I have the option of saying I want to print one for all students, or I could narrow this down by unchecking these and say I only want to print roster one. The other option I have is to click this arrow here, expand that out, and then select specific students. So if I want to, select 3 students, I can find those students on the list, check just those 3 students, and then I'm ready to print. So next then, that you're going to see a gray box that's going to be over here to the right. And on that gray box, that's going to be some of my reporting options here. So I can create an individual student report, which is where we're going to start with the individual student reports. And then this right here, this report format is really just how you want to print them. So single PDF, it's going to print just one file. All of the students are going to be in that file. You could then print it. You could then separate it and then distribute those. The multiple PDFs in a zip file, you're going to have a zip file, and it's going to have each student will have an individual file that's just theirs. So it's kind of up to you which of those you would like to use. We're going to start by taking a look at the simple PDF type. So, but before I go on to that, I want to talk about this little feature right down here, which is pretty handy. And it lets us do translations to these reports. So for this, it automatically starts as English, but I can go ahead and do a drop down, and then off to the side, you can see all the different languages that you would have to choose from. So if you have a student that maybe you need to send home their communications in Spanish as well as in English, you could just click on Spanish, print that report for that student, as well as sending the one home in English for their family. It's just a really cool feature that is available to us right here. So that is a simple, or that's the report that we're going to fill out. So we've got our single PDF. We're doing a simple one, an individual student report. So let's go ahead and take a look at what that will give us. Now, actually, as soon as you do that, at the bottom of that screen, it's going to say generate report. There's going to be a green button. You're going to want to click on that. And then it kind of goes away. And that file is actually created, and it's waiting for us in our inbox, or it's processing and it's in our inbox, and it will be ready, available soon. So to get to that inbox, at the top of your page, up here in this ribbon here, the blue ribbon, you're going to see one of the options. It says inbox. And from there, if I click on that, it will take me to my inbox. There is another way to get there as well. So maybe you've created a lot of reports, you left, and you want to come back and you want to get your reports, but you don't want to go through the whole, all the things in the centralized reporting system. On the login screen here, after you've logged in, we can just go straight to, actually right before you logged in, we can go to the inbox, and then it will have you log in right after that. So that's an option as well. So that's right under the centralized reporting system. You'll see that there's a tile to go straight to your inbox. If you know that you've created some reports, you just want to go in and see the reports, that is an option as well. Okay, so Now let's go ahead and get back to where we were. All right. So once we go in there, so we click on our inbox, there'll be a little link for the report that we're looking at. Um, and this is what the simple PDF type report will give us. So the first thing it's going to give us is it's going to give us the thermometer report. And that's probably not the technical name that's given to it, but I always think of this scale right here as a thermometer. That as the better you do, that it fills that thermometer up. So this right here, we can see that it tells them their scores. Um, and then it also tells them what level they were on. So we can see the student was accelerated with a 725. Off to the side here, there's a little chart for how your child compares. So we have the Ohio Department of Education there. You'll also have a box for your district as well as one for your building. So normally you'll see those for a student as well. Since this is third grade, you'll see a little bit of information on the third grade reading guarantee right here, as well as a link to click. If you scroll down a little further, what you're going to get is you're going to get your performance level description. So you're going to get, um, when we look at our data, we get that at, near, and below proficient, those pluses, the stars, and the minuses. This is just that in a friendlier version, a better description. So we can see our informational text here. We can see that we were near proficient. And then it kind of just says what that means and what our next steps are. Reading literacy, this student was above proficient, and writing, they were below proficient. So you could go ahead and print this off and give this to your parents at conferences, something like this. This is also available in the benchmark testing as well. So if you want to create this type after you've given a benchmark, you could probably give it out at fall conferences as well in a coming year if that's something that interests you. All right, so that is the simple PDF. Let's go ahead and take a second to look at the detailed PDF. So we're going to just flip over here. We're going to click on detail. Everything else we kept the same. You're going to notice that we get the thermometer report again. We get how your student compares with that, as well as the third grade reading guarantee information. We get our performance level descriptors. And then we get a couple additional things. So this one, this longitudinal trend data information. Right now, there's only one test there. This is third grade. This is the first test they've really taken. So we can see that, it creates this little graph there. Here's where they stand. The student actually scored advanced in this example that I pulled. And then if they when they I should say when they take this in the spring, what I'm expecting to see is this graph will expand. So we'll have one for the fall, we'll have one for the spring. It's possible that you could see this, next year this student would have more data. So we'll get a little bit more information going forward there. All right. So that is the longitudinal trend data. There's actually a data chart down here below as well. So I didn't copy that, but you can see the test, how the student scored just in a table instead of the graph. All right. Then it breaks down how your student did on the essay part. So for this one, we could see that it was an informative essay. They got 3 of the 10 points possible, and then it tells them how they did in conventions, elaboration, and purpose. So it breaks it down into those 3 areas. And then, you can see how many points they got in each of those areas. The last section then is the item analysis. So, how did your child perform on each test question? So, you can see the question number. Then, this is under informational text. We can see the question, we can see the standard, and then we can see that this was out of 1 point. and this student got a 0 on it. So it's going to break it down, and it's going to show you how they did on every single question. Okay, so that is the detailed um, report there. The next thing that we have is for printing reports or creating reports, I should say, we have the student data file option. So I kind of think of this as more of like a roster report. And this report is actually what we're used to getting out of the online reporting system. So remember, that is the old system. And I think for that, like when you went into the system, you had two choices. One was score reports, I think, and then I think the other option was student performance, something like that. So if you were to click on the student performance, you'd get a spreadsheet. It looked kind of like this. There was a bunch of demographic information in there, and if you scrolled over a bunch, you'd finally see the test that they took. You would see their scores, their performance level, as well as how they did on each of the sub scores. So, very similar report. It's going to be that exact same layout. Right here for your options, you can get it in Excel, you can get it as a CSV file, which those two are very similar. A text file, if you would need it for some reason in that text file there. This is going to give you the option of creating one for each individual test, or if you want them all to be together. This is what we're used to, this single combined data file. All of your tests would be together. This one, it looks like they're creating them separately. So you'd have one for third grade language arts, one for fourth grade language arts, is my understanding there. Okay, so that is from the um, downloading reports tile. Those are your options of different reports that you can create. Okay. There is one other option, and I like this option because it creates some data that we've been asking for a long time. It lets us um, it lets us export that data or download that data. So I think this is really important, but let me walk you through how to do that. So one of the things that we have been asking for is, to be able to know how our students did on each question. And overall, the centralized reporting system really has answered that, because we know that from part one of this video series, we can see how they did on each one. And then now with this next step, it's going to let us export that, sort those rows so that we could kind of filter for our classes and group our students. Maybe these are my students that all knew how to do this question and whatnot. So that's going to be a really nice feature to have. So let's walk through how you would export that student performance on each individual item. So here's a tile that we've been using. We're going to go ahead and click on that tile. And then we're going to select the test that we want to export. So on that, here is the export button. So you're going to notice that on this screen right here, we can choose, do we want the third grade test, the fourth grade, or the fifth grade? I'm going to just select this one. And actually, this is language arts, so it's we kind of switched gears here as I was creating this. So for this, it would be the same as if it was math, though. Um, so for that, you're going to have an option of what type of report you want. So we have our overall performance by schools. This one is our overall a test, and then it's going to give us a little bit more with our reporting categories. And this last one is the one that actually has our item performance. So this is the one that I really like. In order to download that, you have to change select school to either the building that you're looking for, or what I did is I just selected all schools. So if I'm a district that has multiple elementary schools, this is going to pull all of them together. Down here, you have an option of PDF, Excel, or CSV. The one thing that I'll tell you is the PDF file looks a little nicer. Um, it's just hard to do what your next step would be. So you're not able to really sort it and organize it. It's just here it is, it's a PDF. Excel, this one's going to actually look a little bit nicer. So the rows and the columns look a little better. They put some borders around it. And then we have CSV as our last option here. So if you want to do any work with it, Excel is probably the one that you're going to want to work with. If I know in a future episode, we're going to talk about creating an item analysis similar to the old ones that were available in the online reporting system. We're actually going to use this CSV for that um, purposes. Okay, so let's go ahead and export that data. We get a little pop-up window that just asks us, it kind of goes back over what we selected. And here I selected PDF. I didn't change that. So we're going to go ahead and select yes. Okay. When you do that, it's going to take you right to your inbox. Now, what I've noticed on this one here is the inbox, it never seemed to be ready when it took me there. So it was in progress. And I waited a while and I waited a while. So what I would recommend is close this out once you get there, and then open your inbox back up again. So when we do that, what you'll notice is it basically took this screen here where it had all of our information. Now, this was very colorful and very nice. And what it's going to do with that is it's going to turn it into a spreadsheet. So this is what it will look like, or a little better version of what it will look like. This was actually the CSV version. And what I did is I just extended the rows a little bit so that you could see. So at the top here, or I shouldn't say the very top, but kind of this first section here, it has my breakdown by the state, the district, and the school, which is what we're used to seeing. If I go down a little bit lower here, you would see our individual student data here. So we can see that we have 5 students in our school district, whatever you want to call this roster. And if I were to scroll over, then I would be able to see how they did on their informational text, their literary text, their writing. So with this file, it doesn't break down their writing into the 3 different areas there. Like it did on the parent report, it just gives a number out of 10. So their overall. So that part's a little bit different um, than the other report, but the nice part is we can see, how they did on each question. You could clean this up and filter it so that you could sort and say, I want to see all my students that missed number 4. So that if you wanted to work with them in small groups, something like that, you could definitely do that. Okay, so that is our report. So those are the different types of reports that you can create within the system. What we're going to do next then is we're going to move on to rosters. And with rosters, the one thing that I want to say to you is most of us, as we come in here, we're going to have an identification of a TE. So that's a teacher identification. And what that means is we'll only be able to review the results for the students that are on our roster. That being said, in the past, I know that some districts have, instead of creating a roster for a teacher, they've created a roster and the principal was the teacher. So what would happen there is that in the old system as a TE, you could go in and your students just wouldn't be broken down by who the teacher was. You could click on it, you could see all the students, how they did. The new system, you have to be on, and that student has to be on your roster. So if you were to do the same system, have everybody signed in under the principal, when you come in as a teacher, you're not going to see any data because you wouldn't have any student on your individual roster. So to do that, what's going to follow here is going to be the steps that you would take to create a roster. Now, before we go any further, I'm going to ask you to consult with your administrator, your testing coordinator, somebody to make sure that there's a plan for how you create rosters. It is possible that your district may say, we want to do our uploads through Tide, create our rosters through Tide, and that's a perfectly fine method for doing it. Probably you'll save some time there. You can actually create rosters and update rosters through the centralized reporting system. So what will follow is I'll kind of walk you through that process. But again, for organization, please check with your district. It may be a thing where you want to have a plan for how you're labeling your rosters, that sort of thing. The one thing that you'll notice, I had a couple people ask me this question. They had given a benchmark or they'd given a test, and they noticed that a couple of their students were missing. So what may have happened there is the student may be identified and they were able to test because they had a pre-ID made by your testing administrator, but they were not added to your roster. So you may need to add a student into your roster if you don't see their results. That may be why you're not seeing it. It's just that they haven't been added to your roster, which will kind of show you how to add an individual student as well. Okay, so let's jump into taking a look at making a roster. So on any screen, we have our blue ribbon up at the top here. And underneath that, one of the options is My Settings. And in the first video, we kind of clicked here to see how to look at previous test sessions. So we're going to click here again. And towards the bottom of that pop-up or that drop-down, we're going to see we have some options of add a roster and view or edit a roster. Those are the two that we're going to really take a look at there. There is also upload rosters. My guess is that if your district is doing that, they may want to do it through Tide. So we're going to just mainly focus on these first two options here. Okay, so let's go ahead and click on add a roster first. And for add a roster, when you do that, you're going to get a screen that's going to pop up. It's going to look like this. It's going to ask you for your district, for your school building, and then I like to put in grade level here. Now, when you do this grade level drop down, it's a multiple selection. So if you have, I need to create a roster and it's going to include 9th and 10th graders or something like that, you can click multiple grade levels here. Select your year. You don't need to enter this SSID, the student's last name or first name. I think you could do that if you already had a roster, if you were just adding one student. But since we're creating students that we want to add, I'm just going to go ahead and hit search. And then the next part down here is I'm going to create a roster name. So this is where I would check with your principal, with your testing coordinator. Is there a way that they want to identify your roster? It's possible for you to create a roster for your all of your students, and then also have smaller rosters for, this is my period 1 class, this is my period 2 class, this is my period 3 class, so on and so forth. So students are able to be on multiple rosters. But again, that's a discussion to have within your district as far as, how you want to set that up. Teacher name. For our teacher name, you're going to select the drop down here. Your name should be on this list. If it's not, then maybe you're not in the system as a teacher, but my guess is you will see your name there. Okay, and then we have our current students listed here. And then I believe if we scroll down, we're going to see something that looks a little bit like this. So it's going to be in green. These are all the students in 3rd grade that have been pre-ID'd. So they're in the system as a pre-ID. Over here for this roster that I'm trying to create, these are the students that I actually want in my roster. So I can see right now I have first name, last name, number 11. He's on my roster, or she's on my roster. And then if I want to add, I could click just the plus sign here. As soon as I click that plus sign, they'll automatically jump over to my roster. If I want to add a bunch at a time, I could come down here and I could click the add all. At that point, every single one of these students is going to be added to my roster. Or my other option is I can click these the little check boxes here, click all the ones that I want, and then hit add selected. And those ones will jump over to my side as well. So once you have your roster set how you want it to, you can go ahead and click save. And that is, we just created a whole roster there. Now, our second option is if you already have a roster and you need to add a student. So this is something that might be popular if you're giving checkpoints, if you're giving benchmarks. What you could find is, okay, I gave a test. Um, my coordinator put them in as they created an ID for them so that they could take the test, but that student didn't get added to my roster. So what I need to do is I just need to add them to my roster. So what I could do is I could actually, if I click on here and hit view or edit roster, that will allow me to see my roster. It'll also allow me to add students to my roster here. So if I come back to the screen, my settings, view, update, make sure everybody's there. What it'll look like is I'll come to a screen like this. Looks pretty similar. We have our date there. It's going to ask us for our district, for our school. You don't have to mess with this roster type. Then you're going to select your roster or your teacher name there as an option. So I just have sample teacher, and then I'm going to hit search. And when I do that, you might have more than one result. If you set it up so that there's only one roster for all of your students, then you'll probably have one result there. At that point, I can hit review results. And when I do that, you'll see that I have one line here. Now, if you had a roster for each class, you're probably going to have multiple ones here. You would just have to find the one that you would want to add that student to. Okay, so since we want to add a student, we're going to go ahead and click the pencil right here. And when we do that, we have an option. We're actually going to search for this student. If you know the student's SSID number, you can go ahead and put that in there. You can use their last name to search, their first name to search. You can narrow it down by their grade enrolled. And again, if you any of that information is going to help, hit search. And then you'll want to make sure that you have the right roster name here. These should be filled in for you because you click that pencil there, but just make sure that those two things are correct. And then you'll have a screen that pops up like this. So it's going to look very similar to that other screen that we had. These are the students that are currently on my roster. And then if you may only have one student over here because of how you narrowed that search down, there may be multiple ones. So if that were the case and you wanted to just add one of these, you could click that plus sign there and that student will jump over to your roster, and then just go ahead and hit save. Well, that will just about wrap up this session on the centralized reporting system. We hope that you enjoyed this series and hope that it makes your time in the centralized reporting system a little bit easier. Have a great day.